There are so many people that are affected by the function of a vet clinic. And the clearer your vision is, the easier it is to make a match. One thing that I think is really important is to realize that you will never be everything to everyone.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. If you could start your own veterinary practice from the ground up, what would it be like? What would it take to actually make that happen? It kind of makes me think of this episode of the children's TV show Bluey. I'm a mom of a 1-year-old, so stay with me for just a minute. Bluey is a cartoon show with talking dogs, and the main characters are two sisters around the age of 5 named Bluey and Bingo. And they come up with the Dream House car, which has 11 burger shops, 20 bedrooms, 40 toilets, and a spa on the balcony. And it's all driven by a crew of butlers. And there's even a science butler, Jerry Lee. But anyway, it's fun to imagine this dream veterinary clinic. But today, our guest, Dr. Eva Evans, gives a masterclass on how to build a successful practice from the ground up. And the ironic thing is that she didn't even set out to become a practice owner right away. In fact, in vet school, she thought general practice was boring and tried to do anything but general practice. But each step of her career path has taught her something vital about leadership, culture, and the kind of medicine she wanted to practice. So today, she owns two thriving practices in Nashville, Tennessee, including her most recent one that blends integrative care and modern business strategy in a rapid growing community in Nashville. So, Dr. Eva also gets very candid about what she's learned along the way from managing finances, building culture, and knowing what kind of practice not to buy. It's a very honest, practical look at what it means to design a career and a business around your personal values. And whether you're a veterinary professional or someone in the industry trying to make solutions for veterinary practices, make sure you listen all the way to the end because Dr. Eva shares an amazing answer to how veterinarians and practice owners should approach new products, especially AI driven tools in their clinic. So, if you've ever wondered how to start something of your own or how to think more strategically about the future of veterinary medicine, you're going to get a lot out of this episode. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Eva Evans. When did you know you were interested in veterinary medicine?
I grew up on a farm and it was more like a nature preserve summer camp. So we had a lot of animals. We had horses and goats and rabbits and guineas and puppy pigs. And so I was exposed to all of that when I was young. And my mom is an internal medicine physician on the human side. And so I knew that I really loved medicine and biology and science and all of this stuff. But I also was just obsessed with my animals when I was little, when I was a child. So that seemed like the best path. And I'm really happy that I did it.
Yeah. And so this was in Tennessee, right?
Nashville.
Yep. Oh, and so was it your dad who ran the animal side of things, or is just a place that you spend a lot of your time?
Yeah, so my grandparents bought this land in the 1950s, in 1955, and my dad grew up there. I was born there. I grew up there. All of my extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles grew up there, and spent time there. I actually lived on the nature preserve farm summer camp. Yeah, my dad was the one that took care of all of that.
So you were able to kind of mix the two together, the animals and the medicine aspect of it, which is pretty neat. And I can only imagine also, because this comes up later in the business side of things, maybe watching them having to run all of that as well, maybe sparked a little bit of the entrepreneur side of you as well. Is that, you think maybe that comes as far back as that as well?
Yeah, most of my family on my dad's side is teachers, and on my
Okay.
mom's side was in healthcare. And my mom had her own private practice when I was young, and my dad, ran the summer camp. And so they had their own small businesses. I wouldn't say that either one of them were particularly like business people, so to speak, but I think a lot of small businesses are people who want to create a life for themselves doing what they love. And so they become small business owners, not so much because they love business and not so much because they love the numbers and the strategy and all of that, but really more as a way to be able to do what they want to do. And so that was something that was very evident with both of them when I was young. I guess that's where it comes from. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, so when you were getting into vet school, and I know you went to University of Tennessee for vet school, you have a lot of different experience, and also watching your mom, who was a specialist as well on the human medicine side. Did you have an idea of what you thought veterinary life was going to look like for you, and did that change throughout vet school?
Yeah, yeah. It changed a lot. I grew up with horses and we bred horses and showed horses. And so I thought, I want to be an equine vet, obviously. What else would I do with my life? And then I got into vet school and I remember being in first year and thinking to myself, well, I will never do small animal general practice because that sounds boring. And then that's what I ended up in. And so I went through this transition of initially wanting to do equine. And then I got introduced to industry, and I was very drawn to the idea of industry because to me at the time, there was a lot more space for creativity and being different and coming up with new and innovative ways to introduce people, especially veterinarians. If you're in industry, you're basically working for a pharmaceutical company or food company to place those products in veterinary clinics and help vets implement them. And so that's the thing that I always found very interesting. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to end up doing. Then I got out of school and found out that you need to have 3 to 5 years of general practice, essentially, before industries want to take you because they want you to understand what it's like to be working in a practice because you can't really relate to people that work in a practice if you've never worked in a practice. So I started a small animal general practice job when I first got out of school. And I have to be honest, hated it. I thought, oh my God, I've made a huge mistake. I don't want to be a vet. I don't like this. This is not for me. What I did not realize was one, it takes a little while before you get good at it. And I'm one of those people that if I'm not good at something, I don't want to do it. I think there's a lot of people like that in the world, especially us vets. And it was challenging. It was challenging to be in a new environment and to be still learning. You think you learn so much in vet school, and then you get out of school and you realize that you have a foundation, but you really just you don't have any experience. And the experience is what makes you good at medicine and good at communication and good at efficiency. Your skills, you have to develop your skills, and that just takes some time.
Yeah, and you talked about being in a new environment, right? Because you went to Vegas, right, for
Oh,
this position? A little bit different than Nashville, Tennessee. Having lived in Nashville for a little while, it's a little bit of a different culture. So how did you even find the job out in Vegas?
so I actually did an externship with the AVMA. I did their GRD, Government Relations Division externship that they provide for students in Washington, D.C. And that was another thing because I was so set on not doing general practice. Like, this is not for me. I want to do something different. I want to do something exciting. General practice is boring. Those were kind of the things that I came out of school thinking, but having no like real world experience as a vet, I didn't really know. So I was doing the GRD externship and they happened to have the AVMA PAC, the Political Action Committee, was having their annual meeting in Washington, D.C. during my externship. And so we were invited and encouraged to be part of the meetings and attend the events and the dinners. And one of the board members, who was the chair, worked in Las Vegas. And so we were just chatting at dinner one night, and I was talking about, oh, I need another externship, but I'm doing this GRD, and I think I actually really thought I wanted to do the AVMA fellowship in Washington, D.C., which is, they only take 1 or 2 people a year into their fellowship. You work on Capitol Hill, you work in politics, and that appealed so much to me. It just sounded so fun, and I almost went that direction. He said, why don't you just come out to Las Vegas and do an externship? This was 2011. And I came out of school in 2012. So we were in the recession. It was really hard to find a job. And this externship was not only going to provide me with housing, but it was also going to provide me with stipend, which no externships back then did. And I was like, okay, I can go to Vegas for 2 weeks and like have my all expenses paid externship and just go have some fun and enjoy it. And I got out there and I was exposed to the owner of these practices, owned a dozen practices. And so we just rotated through the different practices every day to see different teams and the different ways of doing things. And I realized, like, you know what, this is actually probably a really good opportunity for my first job. And I'd been living in Tennessee my whole life, from Nashville growing up to Knoxville for undergrad and for vet school. And I was ready to move out of Tennessee and go do something different. And I thought, okay, it's a recession. It's hard to find a job. And I got offered a job out there. And I just thought, all right, I'm going to take this and we're just going to see what happens. And that kind of launched my private practice career.
Well, while you were there, even though it was not the experience that you you loved, you can kind of realize, oh, maybe this is not exactly the direction I want to go. Were you able to watch that individual be a practice owner? Were there things that you were watching and maybe kind of start to put together? I know this maybe
Yeah.
not as proactive in the moment, but maybe in reflection that you kind of were observing that you took forward?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons why I did want to go to Vegas is because of this organization, because I saw what was possible to be a business owner and managing a practice, running a practice, practicing veterinarian, and the owner was practicing there still in one of the many clinics. And it was a fantastic opportunity. And I am very grateful for the experience. I definitely did a lot of observing of just how practices function, culture, teams, efficiencies, even down to like inventory management. And I did have some very good mentors out there that kind of showed me, though they weren't the owners, showed me what matters not only on the business side, but on the medicine side too. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be a very good practice owner if you can't do good medicine. So medicine comes first and then the rest.
So you did decide to go back to Nashville
Mhm.
after a couple of years there in practice. Did you, I'm sorry if this question is weird. Like, did you go with a plan? Did you get a job in advance, or were you like, I'm just going to move and I'll figure it out when I get there?
Yeah. So when I knew that I wanted to move back home, I missed Nashville. I missed the people. I missed my family. I missed wrath and rain and green trees. The Vegas is beautiful. It's a beautiful place. It's a fantastic city, but it's a very different climate and a very different culture than it is in Nashville. So I found a job before I moved and secured that before coming back. And I worked for a year at a emergency clinic here back before they were all corporate. This was a privately owned ER, and that was also a great opportunity to learn from the owners of the ER.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, you actually really enjoyed your ER experience.
I love emergency medicine. I loved the cases. I loved the challenge. I loved the pace. What I found really interesting that I really grew a lot in was learning how to get people to trust you quickly because you don't have a rapport with these clients. They don't know you personally. They're grateful that you're there on a Sunday night or a holiday when no one else is open, but there was definitely a learning curve of how do I get this person who doesn't know me, who's never seen me before, how do I get them to trust me very quickly and be able to communicate with them and walk them through options and prognosis and cost, and then be able to also run a team to be able to perform everything that we needed to do because the ER that I worked at, there was only one doctor each shift. So there were no other doctors to kind of like help you out. It was very much like you gotta kind of run the show. And I really enjoyed doing that. There were definitely challenges. And the biggest challenge I had in ER were the hours. and I struggled to do overnights. And eventually, after a year, working at overnights and every weekend was just not the type of life that I wanted. And so I was ready to shift back into day practice so that I could have a bit more of a stable schedule and be able to see my friends for brunch on Sunday and be able to see my family, for dinner in the evenings instead of being up all night and sleeping all day.
Yeah. So is that where you discovered relief work?
Yeah. So after the ER, I moved into doing release. Right before I left the ER, I had already made up my mind that I wanted to open a practice. And one of the
Okay.
things that I've heard from other vets in the past, a lot of them said that if you want to open your own practice, then doing relief work is a really great stepping stone to that because you're going to get exposed to different softwares, different products, different procedures, different processes, different teams, different types of clients. And you're going to be able to go in and see, like, what do you like? What works? What doesn't work? What do you want to avoid? What products do you not want to carry? What softwares do you not want to work with? And it gives you the opportunity to just see so many different ways of doing things. And then from there, you can take what you've learned and you can pick and choose what worked well at these different places you worked doing relief and create what's going to work best for you on your practice.
I have heard similar things too. And one of the things you also said to me was one of the big inspirations was around maybe even more of a culture aspect of things, like the way that staff were treated and how that interaction was. That was also really inspiring to you. So, what were some of the things that after all these observations, what were the things that you wanted to pull out when it came to culture and building teams and working within teams?
Yeah. So one thing that my mom always told me when I was in school, when I was like, I don't know if I want to do equine or if I want to do industry or if I want to do policy or I don't know. And when I was on clinical rotations, I was like, oh, I'm going to hate surgery. And then I did it and I was like, oh, I actually really like this. And what my mom would always tell me was the easiest way to know what you want is to first know what you don't want. And so when it comes to your teams and managing people and culture, I think I worked in probably at least 10, maybe 12 different practices around Nashville for a couple of years. And obviously, the more you work in these practices is really, the more people get to know you. And the people that work there, I mean, our industry is fairly transparent and the people working in our industry are honest people. And so they would tell me like, this is what I love about working here. This is what I don't love about working here. This is what we wish we could have. This is what we're so grateful to have. And just being able to kind of observe which teams worked more efficiently and had a higher level of functionality versus dysfunction was very helpful to kind of decide like what matters, especially to your nurses and your assistants, kennel staff, front desk. They have a very different working experience than vets do because they have a different job description. And what really goes well for somebody that's a CSR might not be the same way that a nurse or a vet tech wants to work because they're just different jobs. And so it was really helpful to see different cultures and different ways of managing teams to kind of figure out what works the best and what works best for me.
Well, I really applaud you in listening to those things too, because I think sometimes we can come in and like, I'm just going to do my job and clock out. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm just going to focus on what I do. But you were very, and maybe this goes back to you said one of the things you appreciated learning was building trust quickly. And I think that's also something that relief veterinarians really need to work on because you come into a brand new environment, another whole hospital, and not only are you having to build trust with clients, you're having to build trust with a brand new team. And so I think that's a really valuable skill that it sounds like you acknowledged and worked on. Now, were you just really good at building trust and people felt comfortable sharing? I have heard that some relief vets have found that because you are technically an outsider, some people feel more comfortable sharing things with you? Were you also maybe this is a both proactive in asking what they liked about working? I'm just kind of curious how you were able to do that because again, I think it's very easy just to like clock in and clock out and not really appreciate everybody else's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think that, first of all, both, yes. I think that's something that a lot of relief veterinarians that haven't been doing it a long time don't understand is that this is not your hospital. This is their hospital. And you come in and you mold yourself to fit their hospital and their protocols and their procedures in the way they do it. And if you don't like the way they do it, then you don't pick up shifts there anymore. And that's kind of how it goes. But it's not, as a relief doctor, it's not for us to come in and have the entire team, the entire hospital change to work around how we do things. So I think a valuable relief doctor understands that it's their job to come in and be the one that has the flexibility and kind of fits into the way practice already is. And another thing that has always made sense to me just because of, economics and the way businesses work and the way money works is that as a relief doctor, your job is not only to take care of patients, not only to take care of clients and to treat the team well and to represent the hospital well, but it is also to make the hospital money. And if you are not doing a good enough job to justify you being there, the hospital would actually do better to just not have a doctor there than to lose money on a relief doctor. And I saw that sometimes with some relief doctors that were very rigid and they were like, no, it's my way or the highway. I only do it this way. When they walked into a practice that their team isn't trained that way. And they don't practice that kind of medicine. And there's a whole spectrum of how we practice medicine depending on the individual culture and clinic and the clients in the area and all of that. And I worked in practices that were in very different neighborhoods, some very urban, some very rural, some suburban, and they all just function differently. And I think it's important that not only we come in, we are guests as a relief doctor, you're a guest in a hospital. And in some ways, you're right. They do tend to treat you very well as a relief doctor because you're a guest. And I think it's really important to remember that you're a guest and to treat the team and the clients. And every veterinarian, I hope, is going to treat the patients well. Like, I think that's across the board and what everybody's going to do, and hopefully treat the clients well. But also remembering that your function there is to keep the hospital up and running so that the owner can be on maternity leave, be on vacation, take some time off, spend time with their family. And if you're not doing a good job and you're costing them money or headaches or stress or time, they won't have you back. And that's just the function of the economics of business.
I think that's an excellent point. I still remember chatting with you before. It's you had the mindset of how can I make you money? It's like the reason why I'm here is so you don't lose money. And then in addition to the yes, not be a burden on the staff from a human perspective, but also from a financial perspective. So again, I think it reflects a little bit on your business mindset that you're able to bring. And it's so crucial to have that medical aspect, the relationship building aspect, but then also be able to create a business because you have to survive, right? It does no good if you can't keep your business running. So you were already thinking, I want to start my own practice. And I know this is not like a just, it just happens one day that you open the doors. Like this is a process. So, I mean, for someone who may be thinking this as well, and do you mind just sharing your journey, at least the first time? Spoiler, you're going to do this again. But but from the first time, like how did you go about like starting to think of all these elements of opening your own practice, forming on like what did you want to do, what was your practice going to be like, who was your target audience, all of those things, like how did you kind of start and puzzle piece it all together?
Yeah. I think there are a lot more resources now than there were 10 years ago when I started this process. So back then, I was on the internet a lot, reading articles. I was reading books, basic business books. I minored in business and then I did an MBA when I got out of vet school. So I did have a little bit of background there as far as like economics go. And I think that it's just important to do your homework, and the clearer your vision of why you're doing it, what you're doing, how you're going to do it, who you're doing it for, who are your stakeholders in this, like who are the people that are going to be affected by your business. It's your clients, it's your patients, the neighborhood, it's your vendors, it's your staff, it's your family, your friends. I mean, there are so many people that are affected by the function of a vet clinic. And the clearer your vision is, the easier it is to make a map. And so the first thing I started with was, why do I want to do this? What's my goal here? You know, and my goal wasn't just, I just don't want to work for somebody else. It's not that simple. So I defined who my ideal client was and who I wanted to serve and what kind of a team I wanted to have. And a lot of that I think that people miss out on or don't consider is the feelings and emotion that go into the finished product. So I envisioned in my head for a long time. It took me about 2 years from the time of contact to like, okay, I'm going to do this to the time we opened was 23 months. So just shy of 2 years. And understanding, okay, what emotions do I want my clients to feel? What emotions do I want the pets to feel? That's going to dictate what color paint we use. That's going to dictate what kind of flooring we have. Like, what do we want the pets to experience? What do I want my team to experience? What do I want myself to experience? And I knew that if I was going to have to go into work every day for potentially the next 10 or 20 years or more with my own practice, it was very important for me to create an environment aesthetically as well as functionality that would be conducive to me being happy, right? And that included like our hours, what kind of services we would provide, what kind of services we won't provide. Because one thing that I think is really important is to realize that you will never be everything to everyone. And so rather than trying to be everything to everyone and failing because it's just physically not possible, focusing more on, okay, for my own mental health, emotional health, physical health, financial health, what am I trying to build here? And then once I had that concept, then I asked a bunch of questions. I found mentors, and some of them were my doctors that owned these practices that I was doing relief. A lot of them were female owned and they were, very successful practices. And they tended to be on the smaller side, 1 to 3 doctors. I was doing some relief for some corporates, but for the majority of them, the mentors that I sought out were these established practices. And I just went to them and said, hey, I want to own a practice. We weren't anywhere going to be in competition with each other location wise. They were all so happy to help me. And they were like, here's what I did. Here's the mistakes I made. Here's this bank for a loan, going through the process of, first of all, get your financing, because if you can't qualify for financing, then there's no reason to keep going. You need to get your finances in order first, which is easier than most people think. I think a lot of veterinarians have this idea that because they have student loans or they have debt that they can't buy a practice or own a practice, and that's definitely not true. And I just started kind of collecting people that were outside of the veterinary industry that were helpful, financial planner, accountant, website developer, all of these things. And I figured out, okay, well, what can I do? How much money can I get? How much is it going to cost me? I had no idea how much a veterinary clinic cost to build. And it just went stepwise. And it took me 2 years. And it does. It's a long process. Buying a practice is definitely a shorter path. That did not appeal to me because I wanted to stay in Nashville. I had just bought a house. My family's here. I grew up here. I didn't want to move outside of Nashville. At the time, there were almost no practices for sale. This was, 2015, 2016, before the boom of everyone selling out to corporate. So there weren't really any practices that were for sale. And the 1 or 2 that were for sale were not well run. And another thing that I saw from all my experience in practice was if you buy a practice, you're buying a location, You might be buying the building, but you're buying the brand. You're buying the client list. You're buying the way that that practice runs, the procedures, the processes, the protocols. You're buying the culture. That was one thing that I elected not to buy a practice and to start my own. Was as hard as it is to start a practice, to me, it was going to be more challenging to buy one and then change the culture to fit me. And not everybody does go that route. I mean, there are lots of people that buy practices, and I was told by a practice consultant that I was not very smart to start my own practice when I would be much better off buying another practice. But to me, the most valuable thing about my practice is our culture and our service and the way that we show up for clients and the medicine that we practice. And it it would have been more challenging for me to buy a practice that was not on par with what I wanted to do and then go in and revamp it and change it and update it. And, basically you have all these clients been going there for 10 or 20 years and they're like, oh, I don't, well, we, Dr. So-and-so who sold you this practice, he never did blah, blah, blah. We never did blood work. We never did a heartworm test. So I decided at that point in my life that it was going to be more in line with my success to start my own.
Yeah. I'm sure financially it's very different, but from what I hear too, banks tend to like veterinarians. They see that all of your schooling is actually an asset. I've heard good things about veterinarians working with banks for loans, so that's a good call out too. And then you said you had no idea what it costs to do this. And one of the big differences that at least I still remember that you said from your first practice to your second one is that you did a lot of it yourself. You mowed the lawn, you did the bookkeeping, all of the things.
I did all my accounting. I did my website because at the time, I mean, I had a bank loan, but it was bootstrapping, 101. And it was like, okay, well, there's this amount of money and I have to pay this much to the contractors because I can't do the plumbing here. But the things that I could do, I did on my own. And, now that that practice has grown and we have second practice, I mean, we didn't even have an IT person for the first few years. And every time something wouldn't work on the computer, it was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Like, let me go Google how to fix this printer. Now we have an IT service and we just call them and they fix it, which is great. But I think it's important to realize you don't have to have everybody working for you to start a new practice. I mean, when I opened my first practice, we didn't have a dental x-ray at the time. There were not a lot of practices at that time that did have dental x-ray. I mean, now it's like very common and I would hope everyone has one, but we didn't have enough money to buy a cold laser. I didn't have enough money to buy a cautery unit at the time. Very much we're just like not cutting corners at all, but also taking into account that when you have a limited budget, you have to pick and choose, like, what are the most important things that you need? What do you need to get open? What do you need to pass your facility permit? What's required by your state? Every state is different. It was also important to me that for me to buy a building and then have a small practice to start with because I didn't have collateral. I didn't have the collateral to have a $2 million build out practice, which, if you do have that, that's amazing. But people that are starting off, especially if you've only been out of school for a few years, the banks are not going to lend you more money than you can pay back. And one thing that I learned from this whole process was on the banking side, banks do love veterinarians because we are very honest and we pay our bills. And that's not the case in every industry. So there are some banks that have veterinary specific lending programs, and I would definitely encourage people to apply with those. Absolutely apply with your local bank, your local credit union, see what they can do. You might get good terms and good rates. I found that the local banks could not compete with the ones that had a veterinary practice lending program. And another thing that I learned in this process was the default rate for a veterinary practice loan is less than 1/2 of 1%. And that's only practices that are 60 days late on their payment. That's not practices that go bankrupt or go under. And that is very encouraging because when you look at like, wow, everybody else is doing it and making it, and they're making their payments and they're paying off their practices and they're not going bankrupt, it gives you a lot more confidence to realize like, okay, well, if 99.5% of practices pay their mortgage or their bank loan every month on time, chances are I will be able to as well.
The odds are in your favor, yes. Well, just to jump ahead a little bit, but I think it might be helpful because it also allows you to do a little bit of a comparison going through starting a second practice. And I'm sure that there's a lot of recall from how you did it the first time and how you'll implement it into the second one. The second one, you wanted to implement a little bit more integrative medicine. And the other thing that I really, really admired listening to you explain this on our pre-call was how much due diligence you did into selecting the location of this practice. Like you started telling me the history of like the street and the town, and it was just really impressive. It was like you did your research, you knew this community, you knew your audience, and you matched it with this desire of a way to practice. So do you mind sharing a little bit about like why did you decide to do a second practice? What did you want to do a little bit differently? And some of that as well as really doing your research into the community that you were going to be part of.
Yeah. Again, I'm from Nashville, so I've seen the city change incredibly in the last 20 years. We had the TV show Nashville that was such a popular show. We became the bachelorette capital of the world. There are more bachelorette parties in Nashville than there are in Las Vegas now. And so I've seen this rapid development since 2018, basically, of different neighborhoods. And before that, I mean, there were rapid developments of different neighborhoods before that as well. I'm in a city, so I'm in a pretty urban area. And where you are, this is not going to apply to everyone. If you're in a rural setting and you're the only vet in the county, like that's a completely different kind of subset of choices and decisions than if you're in a city where there are, 30 vet practices. So one thing that was really important for me was, location is huge. If you're going to be in a city or in the suburbs, location is huge. And you definitely want to take a look at the population statistics. All of those things are free online. I basically just got on Google and started looking up different neighborhoods, population of different neighborhoods. Google Maps, we just put in like veterinarian and it'll populate where all the clinics are. And you ideally don't want to put a clinic right next to somebody else's clinic. So what I did with both of my practices was I chose a neighborhood that was an up and coming neighborhood with development that I knew was going to, because we're urban, was going to become more and more high density housing. So apartments, condos, townhomes. Obviously, nobody could predict COVID and nobody knew that we were going to see such a boom in the, population around COVID. But I wanted to find a neighborhood that did not already have a vet, that people were going outside of their neighborhood to get vet care. And I wanted to find a neighborhood that I knew was going to grow. Because your new practice, when you start, you have 0 clients. You have $0. You have no revenue. You have no money coming in on day one. And day two, hopefully you got like $200 coming in, and maybe the first month you do $10,000 in revenue and then you grow and you grow and you grow. And I think it's really important if you're going to be in an urban setting to choose an area that you like, that you appreciate, that you value, a neighborhood that's also in line with who you are and what your values are. And everybody's different. So what worked for me is not going to work for everybody. And other people might say, oh, I want to be in the suburbs, which is fantastic. There are amazing opportunities in the suburbs or amazing opportunities in rural areas. For me, living in a city, I wanted to be in the city. So I chose for the second practice, I chose the Wedgwood Houston neighborhood in Nashville because of its explosive growth in population. And that is really what's going to fuel the growth of your practice. It's a lot harder to start a new practice in a developed neighborhood where there's already a couple of vets because the people are probably pretty happy with their vet. Maybe not. I mean, you will get people that are unhappy, but they've been going there for, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. So for me, for what I want to do and my clientele, was we do integrative medicine. So we do acupuncture and laser or wool medicine and also diet therapy, as well as all of the regular general practice. I wanted to be in a neighborhood that was mostly millennials. I am a millennial. So I understand millennials the best because I am one. And for me, it was an easy choice. There were a couple of neighborhoods that I looked at, and it was all about finding the right building, the right spot. Did it have parking? Was it on a main road? What was the visibility? Where were the areas that were going to be developed? So most cities, Nashville included, have population studies, and they will publish data on not only like the current population, but the expected population in different zip codes. And Nashville had a program where they do these 10-year plans. And they say, like, in the next 10 years, we plan to put in, a bus line here and a railway line here. And we're going to be developing this area that has historically been commercial warehouses. We're going to be turning those commercial warehouses that are all falling down, and we're going to tear those down and turn those into a ballpark and mixed use coffee shops and boutique shops. And, I want us to be in a neighborhood that also had things like a dry cleaner and a daycare facility, because I want to be in a neighborhood where people also are going to be like actually living and not just kind of transiently moving through. So looking at what other businesses are in the area or what other businesses are planned for the area and where the majority of the money in that city is going to develop those areas is a great way to choose what part of town you want to be in. Some people, they want to be in whatever place they're in, and this is where they live, and they don't want more than a 5-minute commute. And there's nothing wrong with that. That wasn't the way that I went, because where I live in Nashville, I live quite far out in the suburbs. I live in a very low density population, way far out of the very edge of the county. Very sleepy little community out here, very quiet, not enough people to sustain a healthy business. And there may be at some point, but right now there are very few local businesses in my area. We have a coffee shop and a Mexican restaurant and a McDonald's, but we don't really have more than that because there's not enough people here to invite other businesses to come in.
That's really insightful to kind of dig into the city planning, because you're right. Like if they have a 10-year plan, you really can start to be strategic. And even when you said daycare, I'm like, daycare probably means millennials, because what's the age group that needs the daycare? I'm a millennial too, and I'll be looking for daycare. So that, like, super, super insightful. So stepping back a little bit and just, from a personal perspective, looking at your career this far, and literally you just opened this practice maybe a few weeks, maybe a month ago. So super, super new. You're doing PR. You said you were on the news to spread the awareness. Reflecting back on your career journey, what are the things that you've been really grateful for career-wise that helps you know what you want today? And maybe even it sounds like you're a planner, so thinking out, like, what are your career goals for the next couple of years with opening this brand new practice and whatever else about your personal career?
That's a great question. I would say something that I'm grateful for are people that are outside of our industry having a different take on business, having a different take on how things work, because the veterinary industry is very specific. And that's something that I learned as I've been going through building these two practices, talking to contractors and architects and IT people and, like lawn care services. Everybody kind of they serve all these other businesses that are all people-oriented businesses, and they are missing these very unique parts of the veterinary way of doing things. I'll just give this one example. When I was building out the first practice, it was a very old building, and we needed to redo everything down to the studs. And the HVAC system was underneath the crawl space because this building is 105 years old. And the architect, I said, okay, we need to move the air return vent up on the wall because the air return vent was on the floor. And the architect said, oh, no, no, it's okay. They make these covers, and that way little lady high heels don't get stuck in the air vent covers. Like, so we could put that down. And I was like, first of all, do I look like I wear high heels to work? Second of all, I'm not really concerned about that. I'm concerned about the dog that vomits on the floor or pees on the floor or has diarrhea on the floor, and then it's in the HVAC system forever. So we cannot have an air return on the floor. And we just can't, because you don't ever have to worry about somebody vomiting on the floor or having diarrhea on the floor in the office building where people work. But where we work, this is like a very critical detail. And there were so many parts of this where people were just like, oh my gosh, I'd never actually considered from the animal's perspective or from the pet owner's perspective. And I'm like, yes, we are a very different industry. So we tend to get tunnel vision as a profession where it's like, this is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. And we kind of stay in our lane, and we don't really gather different ways of doing things from outside of our own industry. And so one thing that I have been really grateful for is being part of organizations. I'm part of the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is EO. It's a worldwide business owners group. And other people I've met along the way that are like, they might be in marketing, they might own a lending company or a manufacturing company. And they're like, oh, well, we do it this way, and so that kind of unique view from outside of what vets do has also been really helpful to get me to kind of think outside the box, because you don't know what you don't know.
I think that's excellent advice. And also because you've done everything really recently and you had that opportunity to kind of assess what's out there, because technology and AI and all of these fancy things that are coming into our industry right now, was there anything that you had the opportunity to look into that you're kind of excited about and maybe interested in implementing going forward?
I tend to be someone who is a little skeptical of new things coming out. I think, for better or worse, pros and cons to all of that. When we talk about AI is such a huge buzzword right now. And what AI can do in 5 or 10 years from now is nobody's going to even have a grasp or a clue what that's going to look like. Right now, what I need when I'm looking at new technology, even new drugs, new pharmaceuticals, new anything, is I need to have whoever is selling that to me be able to show me how it's actually going to work. Because there are certain products and certain new technologies that, and we have like the AI imagist from Zoetis for our beagles. Super easy. We love it. Super fast to run. We don't ever have to do our own in-house beagles anymore. So something like that is fantastic. It's a pricey piece of equipment, but the way that you implement it makes it worth it. There are also a lot of pieces of equipment, especially that are AI run, that are coming to market constantly, and new pharmaceuticals that come to market that you're like, okay, but how are we going to actually use this? Or is this actually effective? And there are a handful of things that come to mind that I won't say on this podcast that we either tried or we demoed and we looked at, and I was like, this is not going to make anyone's life easier. You're creating a problem that's not there. And then you're trying to sell a product to solve a problem that isn't a real problem. And so I think that it's important for people not to get lost in the, oh my gosh, this is the new latest and greatest thing. It's really more about like, does it function? Is it reliable? If it breaks, can you get somebody on the phone to come fix it? Does it have a warranty? How much is it? Can I afford it? Is this actually going to make my practice better? Do my clients want this? Like there are a lot of really amazing medical procedures and treatments out there that are extremely expensive to implement. And, I-131 is a great example. Like to go through the process of getting a radiation certificate from the city to be able to do I-131 to set up work. Like if you can do it, I've got a friend in Pennsylvania who's got a rural practice out in the middle of nowhere. He does it. People come 2 hours, 3 hours for that because there's no one around that does it. But we have a specialty hospital 20 minutes away that does that. So it doesn't make any sense for me to implement some of these things that are either outside of the realm of portability for my clients, or you're like, oh, this is really cool, but we're only going to use it once every year, once every 2 years. And so I think that I definitely enjoy seeing what's coming to market. But when you look at the history, especially on the medical side, of all the things that come to market and then all the things that eventually die off and are no longer offered, you're like, oh, yeah, I remember when that product came out and it was supposed to be the latest and greatest everything. And then whatever happened to that? Nobody uses that anymore. So it's important to stay on top of things, but it's also important to remember, like, how is this going to make my practice better? And is it going to pay for itself? Because you can buy great equipment that does amazing things, but if you never use it or you don't have a clinic that can afford it, then you don't need to have that because it's just a loss for your business.
Yeah. So everybody who is listening the last 5 minutes, go back and listen to again, because that was really, really valuable. Everything from the industry perspective as well as veterinarians. Finally, I asked what something you're grateful for from like your career business side of things, but personally, when you think about like, what actually really matters in life, and like what keeps you going, like what is something that you are really grateful for and just pops into your mind when I talk about that?
My team, honestly, like they are at work right now. I'm at home. They're at my practice right now. My associate doctor, my relief doctor, got a new associate coming on next month. They are seeing the patients. They are taking care of business. They're answering calls. They're answering emails. They're running the business so that I can be at home right now doing this, having this conversation with you. And so my team is, to me, the most valuable part of my business and arguably one of the most valuable parts of my life because it allows me to do the things that I want to do and invest my time in the places I want to invest my time, while also providing opportunities for them, for leadership, for growth, for expansion. And, if you're doing it right, then you hopefully have team members that stay a long time and love what they do and continue to progress and get better. Hiring and firing is everybody's least favorite thing, so I won't pretend like it's easy. But if you invest in your team and you find the right people to put in the right positions for the right jobs that they love and that they're good at and that they want to do, that is arguably, to me, the most important part of your success. Obviously, you need to be a good doctor, you need to practice good medicine, have good communication skills with your clients, all of that. But if you don't have a team that has your back and you don't have a team that you trust and can rely on, then it's really hard to run practice.